Getting out of an abusive relationship early makes a huge difference.
And I'm proud to say I did come in as a victim, but I am a survivor.
Then I could see my mom. My mom was walking toward us. And I got excited. And I was like, there's my mom. And then he didn't stop.
I'm trying to keep it together, I said. I gave in to the tears. And I hated that.
It's not necessarily the easiest process. It's not necessarily the prettiest process, but it is the most effective process. Like, you can do this. I'm going to tell you 100% you can do this, and you're so worth it to do this.
I'm sure losing any child is a real arrow through your heart, but you know, she was great. She was a friend and a family member and our daughter.
It feels just as good the 10th time as it did the first time, to have one of your citizens that you're out there protecting walk up and tell you thank you.
There is one thing stronger in me than fear, and that's my determination. Good afternoon. This is Jen Lee, and welcome to episode 12 of the I Need Blue podcast. Visit ineedblue.net to hear previous experiences. Before we start today, some of the content may be sensitive or triggering. Periodically, we will warn of graphic content which is coming up. But please, if you need help, seek it. I'm pleased to welcome Asia. She is a fellow podcaster, and I found her story from Cause Pods, in which we were both guests. Asia's podcast is Letters to the People, and she will share information about it at the end of the episode. Asia was a victim of the satanic ritual cult that runs the LDS Mormon Church. I had heard of such things, but had never spoken to someone who had been on the inside. This is her story, and I want you to hear it from her. Let's get started. Welcome, Asia, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here, Jen.
Great. I know your story is going to be incredible. Can you share some of your childhood memories?
Yes, I would say as I go back over this has been asked me a couple of times, and I grew up with chronic sore throats. And I remember it seemed like it was seasonally. It seemed like 9 months out of the year I had a sore throat, and I had this little bit of a break for 3 months, but I just remember, it's starting up again. And I learned how to kind of self-medicate with that. I also would have nightmares. I was terrified of scary movies. There was always this sensation, I don't want to say always, but I would have sensations some nights when I'd go to bed that I didn't feel like I was there. I felt more like I was kind of floating. I was a very devout member of the Mormon Church, the LDS Church. Part of that devoutness was really studying the Bible, studying the Book of Mormon, studying scriptures. I was a teacher in the congregation, so I was very engrossed and very involved with this, but I was really always working on my relationship with God. It wasn't until 2003 when I had finished building our second house, and that, end of events, I dropped into depression, and it was a heavy, heavy depression. It was weird enough that I was actually kind of dissociating, like I could stand outside myself and look at myself and go, what is going on? Like I was so apathetic. I didn't care. I had kids that had football games and music lessons and all of these boxes. And I had put so much of my energy into this house, and I loved it. And I didn't want to unpack a box. Like, there was so much going on that I'm like, this is so not me. And I'm depressed and I'm sad, and I'm usually a happy person.
How old were your kids?
My kids at that time, my youngest was born in 1999. So he was 4. And my oldest was probably 14, 15. So I had kind of a span of children, and I was a very active, involved mother. I was still involved in my church activities, and this depression hit, and I thought, well, I got to take care of this. This is ridiculous. I would say July of 2003, and it wasn't until October that it was starting to really reach a peak, and I thought, I've got to do something. And so I reached out to a friend. She actually suggested a therapist, which is such a divine experience anyway, like the way it all went. I felt like I was really being guided to get to the point where I am now. I got the phone number of this therapist. So much conflict going on inside of me, because the way I was raised in the Mormon church was, if you have a problem, you go to your ecclesiastical leader. Okay. You don't go to therapy. You don't go to anybody else. It's a spiritual problem, no matter what it is. So you start with your ecclesiastical leader, who is a lay person. They're all volunteers. Nobody is really trained in anything. Somebody could be a construction worker, somebody could be a gardener, whatever. And you're coming in there with, I have this issue. And that could range anywhere from marital problems to addictions to whatever. And these men that are in these spiritual spots are supposed to be, channeling from God to tell you what to do, right? And this is what we believe as this congregation. It's like, well, here's where I go. Part of this ritual experience, it was not only satanic ritual abuse with ceremonies and blood cult proceedings and sacrifices and murders and dismemberments and cannibalism. It was also mind control with drugging, with electric shock, with experimentation and other things like that, where I was in say medical settings or scientific settings. So even though I hadn't brought all that forward yet, because these memories were so huge, they were repressed, I had this underlying feeling of, I hate needles, I hate shots, I don't want to be medicated, I don't know what that's going to do to me. Anyway, I got this phone number, it got really critical, and I decided I had to do something. I remember this day, this was the pivotal day. I picked up the phone and I dialed my dad instead of the therapist, because I still couldn't come to that. And my dad picked up the phone and I said, Dad, I'm really in a rough space. This is not okay. Can we go to lunch? I need to have some, can you help me? And he said, sure. Your mom and I are getting on the cruise ship in Florida. We'll be back in 10 days. And once we get back, then we can go to lunch. And I says, that sounds great. I hung up the phone and I'm like, I can't wait 10 days. So I dialed the therapist and I got in 2 days, filled out his form in what seemed to be record time by his reaction. He was like, you're done. And I'm like, yeah, what's the, here's all the answers, like check, and he's like, oh, yeah. We can work together. Let's give it a couple months and see where this goes. In my mind, what I heard was, yes, I can help you. In 2 months, you'll be cured, right? I wanted to make that be my reality. And because this was so terrifying for me, I thought, okay, I've got enough savings in my bank account. I've got enough that I've put away that I could actually afford this guy for a couple of months without telling my husband, without telling anybody. Like, I'll just do this on the down low, right? The next week I went in for my first appointment and he was a certified psychotherapist. He had all the letters. He started out as a social worker, got into the therapy, got into the psychology, and wanted to actually help his patients by getting more certifications, right? And so he got certified in hypnotherapy just to kind of help deepen that experience instead of just doing a whole bunch of talk therapy. And that became very effective for him. And so that's what he said to me. He very clear. He's like, we're going to use hypnotherapy, and I've got these psychotherapy skills that I'm going to be, monitoring you. But basically, you're going to tell you your story from that space, that brainwave theta space. And I'm like, okay, I'm familiar with this because I've done meditations. It's the same place, right? I just had the intention of going after, where did the depression come from? My body and my mind are like, oh, green light, she just opened the door. And so that first session was recognizing that I was an infant. I was in my great aunt's house. And I remember laying on this, it was a blue cushion, right? And I'm like, okay, this is weird. I don't come to this house very often. That's odd, but I know exactly where I am. And then suddenly I'm like, well, what are these black candles? And why are people standing around in red robes? And what are they, and I started seeing this baby blessing, this christening going on that was done with ritual chanting and this strange noise and blood. And I have no reference point in my real life, because I hated scary movies. Like, I wasn't like, oh, I just saw this movie. And I walked out of there like, I was so stunned. I was so in shock with what I came with. And my therapist responded with, all right, well, that was good work today. We'll see you next week. And I'm like, wait, didn't this floor you? Like, didn't this blow your mind? And he was very much, I'm calm, and he really didn't put a lot of commentary on that. He's like, this is your story. We're just going to keep following it. And I'm like, no, yes, because my body was responding, and my mind, there was this part of me that is like, this is really true. Like, this is your story. And I'm like, okay, we'll just figure this out. It's okay. And so the next week I came back. So that's really where everything started, as far as this story started unfolding. And myself, my body, everything was so ready to say, cool, I am so ready to get rid of what I've been packing around for the last 40 something years.
I was going to ask if it was really hard to go back to that second session, because people getting to the first session can be really hard, but it sounds like you discovered something kind of deep.
Once I started seeing a few different things, I was very tenacious about this, right? My goal is still, I want to get rid of depression. Give me some tools, whatever it is. Like, I was all in. So I was still kind of allowing myself the curiosity and the playfulness, and yet my body was viscerally like, I don't know. I had to go home and sit with this. Like, I was just like, whoa, like, what just came forward? And then I kind of let it go. I was in therapy for 8.5 years. My body was healing. Things like rage were just dissipating. I didn't go in for anger management. I didn't go in and say, I just yelled at my kids. How do we get this out? I was so involved in just allowing the flow to go. Like, I was just trusting what was coming forward. I was trusting where this was going. And I remember there was a day that my oldest son came up to me and he's like, you haven't yelled at us in a really long time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. When he talks about me yelling at them, I was raging. It was scary, because what would happen is I would feel, it's so embarrassing. And I just feel so much, I've worked through this, but I still, I'm reflecting on it, and it just hurts my heart, because I got these little guys, and I'm getting so angry at them.
Yeah.
And it's not them. It's not happening, but it's happening to them. And I just, they're adults now. They recognize it. They get it. But I think about what that experience was from my end, and seeing their looks from their end. And I just feel bad. Do stuff that kids do. They spilled something, they broke something. It didn't matter. They hit their brother or whatever. I don't know what would trigger what. I don't know if I was holding things and just kind of packing it away, and holding things and packing, and this had been kind of a buildup over a while, or if the incident was really, the direct trigger. I would have these episodes where they would do something and I would be angry, like, and then suddenly, like, from my toes, I could feel this rolling emotion, this rolling energy. I could feel it coming up my legs. And eventually I got to a point where I was like, oh no, but it would roll through my body so quickly, but yet I could feel the movement of it, and it would come up, and it was almost like it would just overtake me, and this rage would just come out. And I never acted out on them. Like, I never took something and hit them or beat them, but yelling, right? This is their version of yelling. And were times that I really did dissociate, where I would, again, I felt like I could step outside myself and watch this, and I couldn't stop it. Like, I was like, what is this? I was horrified. And yet I'm in the middle of it too. There was this really strange split that was going on. He said, you haven't yelled at us in a long time. You haven't gotten mad at. It was such a milestone. And honestly, since that point, that kind of grand emotion of rage has ceased to be a part of my life. And that has been, oh my gosh, 15 years now.
You have to get to the root cause. And so I'm curious as to what other traumas were in you.
This is my story, right? People may have other roots. But besides the rage, there was also acting out that had to do with even social behaviors. I'm going to call it flirting, but it's more of a promiscuous kind of stance. And so I did have multiple personality disorder. They call it DID now. One of the things that my therapist said was, as we were starting to work with these multiple personalities, because that did come up a few years into my therapy, where I was like, oh, we've got this. He was saying, it took me a while to track your personalities. You're so fluid in your switching. It wasn't like I had a personality with this name and, like it was not at all like that. One of these personalities was definitely more promiscuous, very flirtatious. I don't know how overt it was because I was in the personality. And I was aware I was in the personality, but I didn't know it was a personality, correct? When those would come up was always when I felt in danger. And that normally happened when a male would approach me with unsolicited attention. I'm not going to blame the guys here. I mean, some of them definitely they had intent, but others, it was all my interpretation. If I was sensing any kind of danger, like, oh my God, this guy wants to like do something or be too close, or he's in my space, or, like I could feel like, oh gosh, I wonder if he wants to kiss me, or, like these things that I am not really wanting to be involved with. Her main goal was, if they like me, they won't hurt me. So the way to appeal that I learned and I was trained with and I was shocked into, and, all of the things that came with this, was to adopt this promiscuous kind of flirtatious persona. This personality's goal was to diffuse any kind of harm by appealing to the sexuality or the sexual side of this person, this man. That would be distracting and this whole thing would kind of go away. Well, what it normally did was it just kind of enhanced things. And then I'm in a situation where I'm like, I don't know how to get out of this. And I was almost raped a few times in college because of that.
I heard you say shocked in treatment. Can you give us an example of what that was like?
Absolutely. In my experience, part of being a member of not only the satanic ritual abuse, but the mind control aspect of this and the scientific human experimentation of this was also, unfortunately, there was a recreational part behind it, but then a scientific, because it was in a scientific setting. There was a metal table. I was either on a gurney or I was on the table, but they would attach electrodes to me to different parts of my body. And then I was in what they would now call electric shock therapy. But in no way do I even call this therapy. This is was a common practice, I think back in the 50s or whatever. People were trying to get rid of certain behaviors or whatever. So this was also done to really drive in a lot of the programming that I was focused on me. And it's a common practice. I was not the only child in this room. I was not the only person, but we were all hooked up to electrodes. I remember there being like halos on my head or whatever. They were run by a machine or by a trigger or by pulses or whatever. Sometimes it was automatic. Sometimes it was just, man run. A lot of times they were coupled with visuals. So I might be watching a slideshow of horrific things that would be, similar to death, to concentration camps from World War II, emaciated people, snuff films.
How old were you?
Okay, so my real induction began when I was about 5 years old. I was born into it, and it was really family oriented until I was about 5 years old. And that's when the whole romper room thing that I talked about on my podcast, my story was I was kind of profiled, is a really good way to put it. In order to try out to be on this weekly television show called Romper Room back in the 70s, I went into the television studio here in Salt Lake City, and they just filmed us, me and some other kids, and all we did was play. And then we went back home, and then my mom got the phone call, hey, you know what, she made it, and we would love for her to be here for the next week. We get to play and that kind of thing. Well, what that was a screening for the men who wanted to, the pedophiles, basically, we'll use that word, child rapists, whatever. But for these men that were actually running the cult, and the men that were screening this, at least for I was chosen by somebody in the leadership of the Mormon church. And I'm talking high leadership, a really, really high position, well-known. I can say this, their names, but this particular man's name, and people, and especially in the Mormon religion, would be like, we know who he is. This was one of the common ways that they would actually profile children. Okay, I want that one. I got selected. And then that kind of immersed me into this whole other very, very well, what do I want to say, connected underground of greater satanic ritual abuse, greater versions of trauma, child trafficking, rape, and then also the human experimentation and the mind control.
Was Romper Room aware?
Okay, so I want to say yes. I'm going to claim yes on this, actually. I'm going to come forward and say, yes, this is one of the screenings, because they would have had to record it and then deliver it to the men. And then also, if you want to think about this, this was done at KSL. KSL is owned by the Mormon Church. It was owned by Bonneville Media. They have these outlets of their own communication. And so, of course, they knew. I'm not going to say that the hostess, that she knew. The thing that's so really sinister about all of this and why it has been so suppressed and people don't know is A, it's hidden in plain sight, and B, people are used as pawns.
I am going to insert a graphic warning.
My dad was my handler. There was incest. He did rape me at night. I remember showering with him. I was like 4th, 5th grade. I have waking memories of that. That was one of those other, gosh, this is weird, but I guess this is what we do, pieces, right? Being touched inappropriately, being abused in other mental ways, and being set up for other abusive situations by him. I still remember when I would see him walking home from work because we lived close enough to his work that he would walk home running to his arms like, oh my gosh, he's my favorite person. My life would end if his life ended. I just adored this man, right? And so I had this very large, loving view of my father. And it had to be that big because the other reality was this very large, dark side of him. I mean, if you would have asked me, I would like, my dad is my favorite person in the world. He's my idol. I want to be like him.
Did he ever make you feel betrayed?
Yes, there were times that I felt betrayed. I remember the key times, and this really translates into, I would say, domestic abuse relationships or other abusive relationships where you're being gaslighted a lot and you don't recognize it. Where these cutting remarks or these slides or these, you're never measuring up, or oh, you could have done better on that. You know they're sharp and you know they cut and you feel it and it goes to your gut, right? Then there's this switch. And I remember this one time I had some difficulty with my mom. We had been in a fight or something. And I was turning to my dad and he says, you're just like me. And I remember that comment and I was like, oh, thank God, I'm like the good person. I'm like this guy. I've always wanted to be like you. But what was so sinister about it is I also knew him to be horrible, like dark.
I am going to insert a graphic warning.
He killed my dog in front of me, like in one of these ceremonies. He took a dagger and just totally went right into my dog for conditioning. It was just part of really keeping you off base. You don't even have to have a reason. It was to basically say, this is something I can do and I will do. This is something you can't prevent and I will do it to you. If you talk, if you this, if you that, right? It was a definite power play. And I witnessed this thing and it was horrifying and I couldn't do anything about it. In every circumstance, you are under the influence of a substance, of a drugging. So you're lethargic or you can't really move well or you're completely paralyzed and all you can do is see things. I mean, they have such a scope and availability of drugs. When people are like, well, why didn't you just scream at him? Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you yell out? Perhaps I did. Perhaps I thought I was. Perhaps I was like screaming inside. And yet when you are in this drug state, like people that have been date raped, that have been given that, that drug, you're going to feel it, you're going to be aware, but you're not going to, it's going to be fine. If you're in that kind of a state and you're seeing something that traumatic in front of you, you're helpless. And clearly this is going on. By then, at that point, I think I was around 10 years old. In addition to always being a drug, whether it's injected, whether you consume it through a candy, or food or drink or whatever, the majority of the times, if not every single time, there is always a sexual violation. There's going to be a rape with an object, with a penis, with a tool, with something, because what that does is it drives the conditioning in further. So they use rape as a tool. It's not just, we're doing this for power and I'm overpowering this child. It is a tool. And so all of what just experienced and what just happened is now being driven deeper because it's now being overlaid with a violence to your body that is sexual in nature also. And then if you end up having an orgasm from it, then the whole shame comes in. Like it is, to untease this is really difficult because as I was going through my therapy and I would start recovering these rapes, I would sob because I'm like, my body responded. I had an orgasm and that felt good. And But none of this was good. I mean, and so the mind game that goes on, and my therapist was really good about, your body's doing exactly what it does. It's as an organic biological thing. When you stimulate your body in this way, you're going to have an orgasm. And I'm like, but I don't want to. I didn't want to. That's not what I wanted. And he's like, I know. And they knew that too. And it's a tool. You're weaponized against yourself. A plastic surgeon is also on the team. And
Really?
oh yeah, scalpel cuts. I was cut with a scalpel. I remember this one time I was cut on the inside of my thighs with a scalpel, almost like fish scales, like really, really tiny, thin together, so that when I would walk, that pain was there, but I didn't know what it was. And they heal really, quickly, and they heal without scarring and all of this other stuff.
Were you forced to watch other people being violated? And did
Yes.
it just happen to the females?
No. Oh no. A child was a child. And I want to get rid of the stigma that this is just child trafficking. This is just child experiences. I know I've talked to advocates who know about this, and they're like, yeah, well, by the time you're about 12, you age out. And I'm like, they accessed me till I was 36 so they could access my kids. They could create, arranged marriages. So now they have it in the family and they know how to access all of this. And so some people do age out. It depends on what you're marked as, because they do mark you as certain things. You just might be bait for particular pedophile drops. You might be filmed. And once you age out of the niche of what they want to film, then you'll age out of that. The people that are part of this are groomed. They put time into grooming these people. If you're in the system and you don't heal out of this, you're still able to be accessed. All your handler has to do is use whatever accessing tools they need. So it could be a phone call, it could be a tone, it could be a look, it could be a word, it could be a color, it could be a sound, a smell. I mean, it could be a combination of things. It could be a touch in a certain spot on your body. But they've put enough time into really conditioning their victims that they have access to them whenever they want.
Where was your mom in all of this?
So that's a really good question. She wasn't a part of the majority of my memories. Like, there was a family version of the ritual ceremonies, ritual abuse, family reunions where we all gathered, and this is my dad's side of the family, right? So I remember seeing cousins, and I remember seeing there was a lot of aunt and uncle participation. My grandparents were part of it. Like, it was a family situation, and I did see my mom there, because my mom never acted out on me, or she was not one of my main perpetrators. I don't necessarily know her story. So I don't know if she was coerced and forced and just as a puppet, which I tend to think she was, or if she was an active player and I just wasn't assigned to her. There were home rituals that I only saw my dad at. The church got broken down into like local congregation, and then a step up into kind of a broader congregation. And then for me, I got delivered to or sold into the highest level of this ritual group.
Seeing clips from a movie is how some describe the experience of recovering traumatic memories. Is that true for you?
Part of my calling on this earth is to have complete memories and ceremonies so that I can have my podcast, so that it can help people and I can actually start putting pieces together and help other people connect the dots. I would get entire ceremonies. So I would go in and I would start in one particular space. Didn't matter if it was beginning, middle, or end. And I would stay with this memory until I got the whole story. So it didn't matter if it took 2 sessions or 2 months of sessions, but I was with it until I got the whole story. And created a situation where I could start referencing and going, oh, I'm picking up names, I'm picking up faces, I have locations. And then I would just kind of drop into the same memory the next week. And it's like I'd pick up where I left off, and suddenly there was even more, and there was even more. So I can talk about my experience with more completeness. I was born into the Mormon church, but when you start stepping into this realm, doesn't really matter who you are or what you're associated with. Underground is really where this group identifies. And I saw public officials. I was involved with seeing government officials. I know that there were judges. There were people that were high in the community as far as teaching at the university. And also church leaders. It was just, I want to say, an elite kind of group that was really, that runs this. And in this particular state, it's really thorough. It crosses over religions. I was even in a Catholic cathedral for a number of these. And this is going to be pretty graphic. There was this one experience where we were on private property. There was a big field. I remember waking up into it, right? So the way this memory went was we came as families to this event. And I think it was supposed to be something fun. They were giving the kids blue candy. I remember not liking the taste of it. So I kind of chewed on it for a minute and then I just kind of spit it out. And it was a drug. And so I just remember all of the children, we all fell asleep, or we all went into this drug state eventually. It didn't take long, actually, but the children were in one area. And I woke out of this drug state because I didn't have a full dose. And I remember seeing everybody dressed in temple clothes. And this is Mormon temple clothing. At the front, I could see there was a platform. It was like a wooden platform. And on this wooden platform, there was this man, and he was strapped to a stake, almost like if somebody was going to be burned alive. You know how they would strap him to a stake, right? They were skinning him alive. And the screams were harrowing. It was ridiculous. And I remember identifying the three men that were up on the stand that were leading this, and they had almost like an executioner kind of person that was, taking the blade to this man. Every once in a while, if I remember right, I think they would participate in it, but that was not necessarily their thing. They were just there overseeing and saying something to the crowd. I don't really recall what was being said to the crowd, but the witnessing of this ceremony was definitely there to condition everybody. This is what happens when you try to get away from the group. This is what happens when you tell about this group. And it was a really clear message. Don't betray.
Is that what happened? Is that this person tried to get out of the...
Yeah, he was actually trying to get public. I don't know how successful he was in it, and I never was able to identify him, but they made this long and slow. Horrible, horrible, horrible. The other thing and this is graphic also, there is this talk about the drug adrenochrome and how, if you don't know about it, you can look it up, but it is also, it's the adrenaline that gets pumped into your bloodstream when you are experiencing a great amount of terror. And I watched that harvesting from children. Drinking human blood was part of what I witnessed, especially. I mean, I wasn't getting the adrenochrome because it was too valuable, but I was forced to drink blood and I was forced to eat flesh, and I witnessed abortions.
And how old were you?
Anywhere from, maybe 5 on up, I would see things like this happen. When I started, quote unquote, participating in the particular infant murder or child murder, I was probably about 7, 8, I want to say. So I was still very young. And this is graphic also. But the participation part was me being brought over in front of the altar. And obviously I was standing on like a stool or, something up. And then there was always this man behind me in this big cape, this robe or whatever. And there was this dagger, and they would make me put my hands around this dagger, and then they would put my hands around my hands. And then they would proceed to, kill the child that was on the altar. And then immediately I would hear in my ear, look what you did. You did this. And so those words really got driven in, like this was and in an altered state, in this drug state, seeing what you're seeing, the feedback is, I did this. Oh, and the other thing that was really, really disturbing as I was getting my memories was the fact that I would be at these experiences, and whether my life was being threatened, because that happened often, or whether I was watching somebody else, whatever, at the end of all of this, my dad was always there to, quote unquote, rescue me or take me away from it, or he was taking me home. And not once in my brain go, what are you doing here? And since you're here, why aren't you fixing it? Instead, he's the rescuer. He's my hero. He's the man with the cape on. It's like, thank you for getting me away from this. Let's just get away as fast as we can. And there was no association with, and you're part of the gang. It's just like, thank you for getting me out of here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The reason we call this satanic ritual abuse, right? Satanic focused, is there were so many setups, so many rituals that were set up where Jesus and Satan would face off, and Jesus always lost. So the winner, the stronger, was set up to be Satan. The biggest one, the easiest one was just like, look what's happening to you. Does praying to your God rescue you? No, your God has abandoned you. Your God doesn't care. Jesus isn't here. See how he doesn't show up. Like it's this conditioning against any kind of connection with deity, very attacked, very focused.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you, I had somebody that told me that there was similarities between the Mormon and the Catholic Church, basically because their services are so structured. We have the 10 Commandments, and one of them is do not murder. Mm-hmm. Well, you gave the example where you had your hands on not a sword, but anyway, the dagger, and they told you that you had, essentially killed that child, which would be murder to you or I.
Absolutely.
So how was that? Or did you not call it murder? Like, how did they reference justifying the killing?
Oh, that's a great question. So they were really able to just kind of separate this, right? For me, it was murder. They used those words. You just killed this child. There were mind games that I had to play, and I had a timer, right? And I had to perform certain tasks, because if I didn't do it in time, then they usually had like I feel so bad to even say this, but they would have usually it was like a puppy or a kitten or, something hooked up to a device that would basically kill it. Right. So, and it was usually done in a very bloody way because, you've got to see the gore. So the time frame was solve the puzzle, do the task, perform the performance, do the thing you need to do to save this puppy. And you never won. You never did it. It was always set up to where you killed the puppy, you killed the kitty, you killed the child. So it's very clear that you are at fault. You are very much at fault, and all of your efforts never really amount to any kind of success. So self-doubt is massive in being instilled in these victims. Like, you don't trust yourself. You always defer to authority, because some of these things really train you into that. Like the murder part, for sure. As far as their belief, no, it's a sacrifice. No, it's a utilization. It's just what you do. It's just part of what they do to further their agendas. There were times that as I was recovering memories, I could see what was going on from an outside perspective, almost like I could actually have a really clear view of the entire room of what was going on. But not only did I get a clear view of the room, I was sensitive enough in these situations that I could sense motive. So I knew why the people in the room were doing what they were doing. I knew that particular man was really driven and motivated by the science behind it. I knew this guy was really driven and motivated by the sexual responses he was getting from it. I knew that this other woman was fully into bloodlust. Like I knew why they were there, and it made it like, oh, that's clear. I mean, I wasn't really even judging it. It was just part of the experience where I was like remembering this, and I could see motives. It's really hard to blanket the whole why are they doing this outside of saying they have agendas and they agree on these agendas, and what they're drawing from those agendas is very individual. But underlying all of it is an agreement that this is what they want to push forward, and they will continue pushing it forward.
Is abortion pretty normal?
Oh, God, all the time. Yeah. In fact, there are women and girls that are marked as producers. I mean, it's almost like their job is to
reproduce.
So they will be impregnated, or in a number of ways. It doesn't really matter. It could be artificially, it could be with a rape, whatever. But the point is, they're there to produce either a baby. So what the purpose of the baby is for, sometimes it's fully born, so it can actually, because depending on who the father is, the origin of the sperm, right? If it's coming from somebody that's got really good bloodlines and is going with the agenda, or if it's coming from, say, a prophet, or coming from a world leader or a area leader, or somebody that they want to preserve this kind of, these genes, then they have an agenda for that child. If her job is just to provide a sacrificial child for that moment, then that's going to be part of the plan. If it's just to produce a fetus that can be consumed right after the abortion is happening, then that's there too. And I feel bad. I can see your reaction here as we're talking. And there's no way to normalize this.
Which is why I want you to be candid. I'm just like, ooh, like And in my mind,
Yeah.
honestly, the question that came to mind was, so these women who know their child is going to be sacrificed or eaten, are
They are sickened and mortified. Of the women that I remember in ceremony, they want nothing to do with it. Of the situations that I personally witnessed and the energies that I was sensing in that room, when this was happening, it was all involuntary. They really did not want to have this be their role. I am in contact with a woman. My heart goes out to her. She's in a really fragile place and has been there for a very long time. But, she basically told me that this was her role, to produce babies. And what did she say? 5 or 6, maybe even up to 8. And all of them are gone, is the way she put it. And she said they were sacrificed. And she couldn't go into it more. I'm going to throw this out there too, that once I realized 6 months into my therapy that it wasn't just me, that this was, it wasn't just like incest, and it wasn't just like these little weird ceremonies that the family is going to, have this reunion and do something really like disgusting. I was actually starting to see that there was patterns. My dad really was a handler, and it was becoming more organized, and I was being sold to men and things like that. I recognized also there was mind control going on. And I saw very, very quickly that I had to cut off all relationship with my parents because of my handlers. It took me a little longer to cut off with my brothers and my sister. But the reason I just cut off from everybody, because I did not know who was involved as a perpetrator, like as an active member. And I did not know who was controlled. This would be my brothers and my sister. And I did not know who was a reporter. You're always trained. A lot of people are trained to report. You're trained to report on each other. And so super easy. Dad calls one of the siblings. Hey, have you talked to your sister lately? Well, yeah, she said, and they went to and they're with, and now all of a sudden he's got this cache of information that some of it is going to be very useful. Right. And so it just helps the tracking process. Or, oh my gosh, she said the weirdest thing the other day. She said that she's starting to have these nightmares and she's starting to see your face. And so that's going to be an indicator to him, like, oh, we need to, we need to reaccess her, bring her back into the group. We need to do some ceremony. We need more of the mind control. We've got to like drive this down. And the next, hey, daughter, do you want to go to lunch? I was like, well, sure. So you think you're going to lunch, you show up at lunch, you drink something that he's like, hey, I took the liberty to get you, your water or your soda or whatever. And you're like, oh, thanks. I love that. You drink it and then you're gone. And then before you're really out, it might look like, he's helping you to the car. And it's like, sorry, waiter, she just had like a seizure, a thing. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, great. My dad's helping daughter. Right. And in the car you go and off to the, destination you are. And for the next hour and a half, because, you're there at lunch and nobody's really going to notice, you get reconditioned in very severe ways. And then you wake up maybe with a headache and you're just like, oh man, lunch was not pleasant. But then part of the conditioning is, you wake up in the car and it's like, oh my gosh, that lunch just didn't agree with you. Like, and they start doing this whole gaslighting thing and really loading your reality, right? And programming what you forgot, quote unquote. And so you're like, oh yeah, I remember sitting at the table, I know that I went there. And it's just like, oh, you know what? We'll get your car later. Let me just take you home. You can call into work, whatever, that kind of thing. And it's all taken care of and you're so grateful. But now you're not having your nightmares anymore and you're not seeing your dad raping you at night because you just got reconditioned.
Yeah, that's crazy. So are you afraid? Are you afraid that they might find you?
No, in fact, I had to work through a lot of that. One of the biggest things that I've ever done in my life is start a podcast with my name. Back in 2019, I was the first time I ever was invited to be on a radio show. I went on and I had a pseudonym, like I went by a different name. I did not tell a story as graphic as I'm sharing with you today. It was just really, I have this and this happened. It was just fairly, kind of tip of the iceberg kind of stuff. The radio host was interested and curious. We'd already gone over some things prior, so I knew what to expect. He asked a few questions that kind of jarred me and I didn't expect that. And then we got off that phone call and I think I had to recover for like 2 days. Like I was shaking, I had to leave town. I was just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my God. It was just really, really jarring for me to actually say something. And I was pseudonym. Like I had a total different name. It was just that act of doing it. And so I went through 2019 with this pseudonym. I was on this particular radio show for almost the entire year into 2020 as a guest, every once in a while talking about my stuff. And it got to the point in late 2020 where I realized I was invited to be on another podcast by somebody that had been listening to this radio show, right? And so the gal reached out, and it took me like a week to respond to her. And then she responded back, and it took me about a month to respond back. Then I said, hey, is this audio only, or, is there audio video? And she came back, it's audio video. And I went through this whole, I am so not ready. I don't want people to see my face. I don't want whatever. Anyway, what that did is that was actually the door opening that, I kind of crawled across the threshold very slowly into realizing, you know what, I know this is important. I know this is a huge message, but if my face is going to be on there, then my name is going to be there too. People are going to see me. They're going to know who I am. I can't use a pseudonym anymore. So I was really kind of breaking all of this down. And I finally really got to this point where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually really empowering. So starting my own podcast was another step in that. And it has also brought up some other issues and other things that I'm like, oh, look at that. I'm avoiding this here and I'm avoiding that there. And this gets to be addressed. And so, my healing is still continuing. I'm not going to say I'm healed, but I am going to say spending the time that I spent digging it up the way I did really was thorough. And I can hold a container and listen to somebody else's experience without being triggered. What I was saying is maybe people are listening to me talking here and they're like, oh my gosh, how come she's not like curling up and like, just kind of this blubbering, like traumatized ball of emotion. And it's because I've actually processed that ball of emotion like over and over and over and over. I have cried tears so deep that I didn't know they existed, like from places I didn't know I had, kind of sobbing and crying and raging and wanting to kill things. And for a long time in my process, I fantasized about like creating Molotov cocktails and throwing them at my dad's house or, like something, I want to watch this thing burn, like really allowing that anger to have a place, like really allowing those fantasies just to kind of be there, just journaling it out or just feeling what that would feel like, because that is so cathartic. And that's part of what gets repressed. That's part of what gets put away. And so part of the healing process is like opening the door and saying, okay, we're going to let some super scary emotions release. And once it's released, you might have a body memory where your legs start shaking or you feel like you've got this sharp pain in your side or, and then it's all, okay, I just released emotion. Now my body's doing something. I don't need to go to the doctor. I'm going to, I need to sit with this because this is probably related. And then you might get a memory. You might get a recollection. I'm going to tell you, if you don't go there, and you don't open those windows and you don't rip off that Band-Aid or you don't do those things, it's going to find some way to give you indicators that it wants to rid itself of this. And if you keep ignoring it, it's going to get chronic. You actually have to go into this knowing that you might see something you don't want to see, right? So if you're not ready, and I've talked to a number of people, it's like, oh, I don't want to know, I don't want to see, then it's like, great, that's where you are. I mean, I would even say journaling can be the witness until you get the courage to actually kind of, confide in somebody. Dump onto this page and you'll start telling yourself the story, being friendly to yourself and being curious in these really volatile emotions. Boy, I mean, that's a balancing act too. But, giving yourself time and saying, okay, I'm going to come back to this, because what you're doing is you're actually initiating a relationship with yourself. Your body stepped up first. The thing is being given to you, and your response is going to be really critical to what happens after that. It's not necessarily the easiest process. It's not necessarily the prettiest process, but it is the most effective process. Like, you can do this. I'm going to tell you 100% you can do this, and you're so worth it to do this.
Those are so powerful words, is you are worth it. I have more questions. Will you come back?
I would be happy to come back. Absolutely.
But right now, I want you to tell us about your podcast.
Thank you. Okay, so my podcast is called Letters to the People. And you can reach me through an email. If you want to write to me at info.letterstothepeople@protonmail.com. That is definitely possible. I have a website, letterstothepeople.com. On there, I'm starting to put on some resources. I have all of my episodes. Kind of go on the website and learn a little bit more. If you are a victim and or a survivor, and you want to write something physical, you want to write a letter and send it somewhere so that you know that it's actually been, just even the whole process of writing it down, putting a stamp on it, sending it somewhere so that you know that it's out there and it's going to be received in a safe manner, then I have an address. It's on my website. You can go there and look at the address. We will take your letter, and if you want to, you can actually write on the outside of the envelope, please don't read. You just, if you don't want anybody to witness it, you don't, we will honor that. So you can write that on there, please don't read this. I just, you just basically will receive it knowing that you just wanted to have that aired out and sent off, and it's safe. We can destroy it or whatever, or we can read it and witness it for you. And you can give us instructions on what you want to have that. I haven't had a lot of letters coming in yet, but I do know that at some point it might prove to be proof. What I'm focusing on, or what I'm encouraging people to focus on, is not necessarily seeking justice in the justice system, but seeking healing within themselves, because the whole situation of stepping into a place where you're going to be asking for justice, or what the process is of going through a criminal justice system, is going to require you to have some real strength. And being able to give yourself that by working on your own healing is the best thing you can do for yourself. I'm also on Spotify and Stitcher.
I think that everything you just said is great, because there are others like you who have experienced the same things and probably worse. And until we start telling our stories, nobody will know.
A lot of gratitude for holding this space, spending time with me. I am getting emotional here, allowing me some space to actually speak, and gosh, I didn't expect that. Yeah. It's really, it's important. And unfortunately it's more common than people want to believe it is. And this is one of the biggest reasons it's been able to continue for the decades and eons and be as prolific as it is, because we don't want to know that it's a real thing. We want to marginalize it and think that it's people are making things up. And we don't want to actually sit with the fact that if it is real, what that means. And really having that compassionate ear. You don't have to do anything about it, but just having the awareness that this is a real thing. And there are a lot of people suffering in their daily lives because of it, is so important. And the other thing I want to leave with people as they're listening to this is I'm going to say with confidence, you're rubbing shoulders with people that are involved in this. Unfortunately, you probably know perpetrators, people that are actively involved in it. And unfortunately, you probably know victims that have repressed this too. And people are living their lives, and some of them know this is part of their life, and some of them repressed it like I did. And they're living with this dark part of themselves that is really haunting them in ways that they're not going to be parading around talking about, and then there's others that it's very clear that they have some, inner demons that they're working with, but it is that common. And I think the more that society knows this and we can have these conversations, the faster that wound gets opened and aired out and healed.
How do you address people who will hear this episode say she's a liar? That's not true. She's just has a chip on her shoulder, trying to stir up stuff. She has no proof. That is how we will start our next episode. Fair enough?
Oh, yeah, that one. Okay, fair enough. Excited.
I have chills. I so enjoy talking to you, but I'm going to close for now. This is Jen Lee of the I Need Blue podcast. You can find all of my episodes on www.ineedblue.net. Plus, I can be found on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, thank you for listening.